Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first talk, online talk of the Situating Memories. Situating Memories is a series of online talks that you will always find on this YouTube channel from SPIE Art Festival. SPIE Art Festival is a biannual festival that takes always every 2 years, takes place in Munich in the autumn. And this year we have it on the 20th of October to the 4th of November. And Situating Memories is a special format for us. We especially want to do it online and prior to the festival because of that we can reach more audience, not only to connect different artists internationally, globally, but also to connect the audience globally. And this talk would also be later put on our website. So if you have friends that is from a different time zone, welcome them to take a look at it. And my name is Betty Yi-Chun Chen. I'm the co-curator for this year's edition of SPIE Art, and especially mostly for the program in our program focus called When Memories Meet, where we have invited artistic works, interventions and installations or theater productions from mostly from regions from East Asia, Southeast Asia, and South Asia. But the idea was not to do any kind of focus on any region or any nation. What connects this program is more on the strategies and efforts and motivation and all kinds of attempts that deal with memories and remembrance. Because we think it's memories on the one hand, in a way, never universal. It needs a context. But then this context, if once shared among different people, different artists, then we see maybe new connections that was not covered by the dominant narratives before. And I personally am very surprised to see, I think it's hardly any festival that you have such a focus on a series of works that deal with specific historical or historical narratives or historical past. But of course, all these past as artists have shown us that shows a connection of how come our world is like the world we're living in. So the Situating Memories is, like I said, a series of 3 talks. Today is the first one. And then we will have within September another 2. On the 19th of September, it will be live in Saigon. And then but then we will get to see online on the 2nd of September, and then the last one end of September, on the 29th of September. Then we will move our lens to 2 artists from Taiwan and Hong Kong. So yeah, and then today specifically our theme is tracing fugitive memories, and we have 2 artists, Sanka Teswaran and Imad Majid. Both of their works are invited to this edition's SPIE Art. And then both of their works are related to the recent history of civil war in Sri Lanka. And today we are going to hear from both of them. And because I think it's a little not so elegant if I just read out the introduction that Tra prepared for us. So I would just quickly, in my version, we will first hear from Imad. Imad is a multidisciplinary artist, working both before as a journalism and yet now as an artist. And we will also hear more from his work, how he dealt with both of this very different medium in his work. And Sanka is known to our SPIE audience before. We had seen his work, Criminal Tribes Act, before in the last edition, and also a preview for what we are going to see this time. My name is Tamil, 3 Lives. Yeah, I think without further ado, I would pass it on to Imad.
Thank you, Betty. I'm very pleased to be, can my screen be seen?
Yes.
You can see the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So I thought maybe it's good that we begin by situating a little. So what we're seeing here is a map of South Asia that was published by Niemals South Asia, one of the more important publications that focuses on South Asia. What they've done here is inverted the map of South Asia to kind of move towards a more decolonial, global South-centric approach. So when speaking about Sri Lanka, I think it's important to kind of look at the trajectory of how this nation state was formed. So after subsequent centuries of colonization by the Portuguese, the Dutch, and then the British, Sri Lanka gained independence in 1948. And what happened in that moment was this formation of a nation state that was based on a majoritarian democratic politic. And it was the decisions of the powers that came into being that kind of shaped the ethnic fault lines within it. One of the key moments is 1956, in which the Prime Minister at the time introduced a official language bill that came into effect in 1956, which basically made Sinhala, the language of the majority Sinhalese population, the primary language of the country, which in effect kind of disenfranchised the Tamil minority and the Tamil-speaking communities in terms of how they were able to navigate the state's infrastructure. So this basically furthered the tensions between these populations, eventually over decades culminating towards the point of the Tamil people seeking self-determination and a separate state, right? And so you have these insurgencies that begin towards the 70s, not just among the Tamil population, but even Sinhalese Marxists and Tamil Marxists, both taking up insurgent means as a way to grapple with the state. And in 1983, there was a racial pogrom where Sinhalese people responded to the deaths of 13 Sinhalese soldiers by the LTTE, whose lives were taken by the LTTE, which led to widespread violence against Tamil communities across the island. And all of these events culminated in the beginning of the Civil War. And I'm just going to show you a map here. So what you see here, they look very similar. On the left, you see in dark green, the aspirational state of Tamil Ila, right? That was being fought for. And on the right, you see the electoral map, which is always very interesting to look at in the context of Sri Lanka. You see that a majority of those who voted against the Rajapaksas, who led the war effort and genocide that ended in 2009, the majority of those who voted against it, they didn't have an ideal candidate against the Rajapaksas, as is kind of the norm here, but you see a retracing of the map of Ila with the exclusion of one part of the island that is in blue, which is where a lot of the Muslim population who were expelled from Jaffna in 1990 resettled. And then you have the inclusion of...
No, Imad,
Yeah, Imad, you're
I'm back.
You're back.
Yes. Okay,
yes.
Great. Okay. So as I was saying, the war culminated in the widespread slaughter of not just LTTE combatants, but there were many civilian casualties as well. And also at the end of it, there was the surrender of many LTTE cadres who have since, many of whom have since, their whereabouts have been unknown, and they are considered disappeared. So that leads me to talk about the continuous protests of the mothers and families of the disappeared. In 2017, after nearly a decade of asking the state for answers on the state of their loved ones, the mothers of the disappeared in the North and East began a continuous protest in January of 2017, asking the state to give them their children back. And this came just after the Sri Lankan government implemented the Office on Missing Persons, which was meant to trace and deal with these reports of disappearances. And there have been many problems with that institution. Here you see a photograph by Kanapati Pillai Kumanan, who has been covering these protests continuously as well. And you see this gesture of a very aged body of a woman holding on to a identity photograph of her missing child, right? And this is something we see a lot in the protests, where these images become evidence that they use to state that this person did indeed exist. So what happened last year is that the Sri Lankan army made this statement that it was not true that LTT cadres surrendered to them. And this actually goes against the information that the state themselves provided at the end of the war. And in response to this, a representative of the Secretary of the Association for the Relatives of Enforced Disappearances said, "We are the witnesses who saw our relatives and friends surrender. Many of those who surrendered their loved ones at the end of the war are joint witnesses," right? And so you have constantly this back and forth between state institutions and the mothers and families of the disappeared, making claims around the truth of the matter. A little bit about my own approach to this. I began my career as a journalist in 2010, just as the war had ended. And in the course of those 10 years or so of exploring that field of work, I found that there were quite a few limitations in terms of how a journalist can approach these kinds of issues. And more recently, I have found ways to apply artistic practice towards talking about it. And today I want to talk about this issue that comes up. So in 2010, there was a report by the Lessons Learned and Reconciliation Commission, which was instated by Mahinda Rajapaksa, the president at the time. And criticisms of this commission, which had hearings for families affected, were that when these commissioners were listening to the plight of those affected, there was very little empathy shown. And even with the 2015 commission called the Parnagama Commission, there was this phenomena of interrupted storytelling, where a mother of the disappeared would state what had happened to their children and then also go into the trauma that they themselves had experienced, and the commissioners would interrupt them and ask them to focus on the children instead, kind of negating their trauma, while simultaneously these mechanisms, every time they're repeated, also re-traumatize these individuals. So how do you, as a journalist or as an artist, approach your process of covering this plight without further re-traumatizing or interrupting this storytelling? So in my book, Testimony of the Disappeared, I draw from the corpus of the reports of these commissions. Here you see one from the LLRC, where what I have done is I've used a blackout poetry approach, and basically certain categories of words, such as wife of a LTT cadre, is blacked out, right? And then this idea of victim and perpetrator are also blacked out. So whenever you are supposed to see the Sri Lankan army, it's blacked out. So kind of speaking to and employing the state's own approach of interrupted storytelling towards the state corpus in and of itself. So it's a sort of artistic maneuver to show the violence of this kind of thing. And I think in my own approach of creating the book, I conducted interviews with mothers of the disappeared, one of whom you see here. You see another very evocative gesture here in the protest. And in speaking to them, I knew from experience that typically when, as a journalist, an editor sends you off to do a story, they'll give you maybe 10 questions and they'll have an angle for you to go at. And you go and you spend maybe at most an hour and you just shoot through these questions and you're kind of programming, in a sense, how they are to respond. And so my approach in conducting interviews was just to listen, to start with a few questions that were quite open-ended and just allow them to speak, because the programmatic nature of this kind of thing is that the language is shaped in a certain way. The mothers have to be very succinct and to the point and give certain information, right? And so how do you loosen that up and open it up to more of their experience and more of their struggle with the articulation in and of itself? And what was interesting is I spoke to them for 3 to 4 hours, and afterwards, when I thanked them for opening up to me, they thanked me in turn for being patient with them, because in their experience, be it activists, journalists, or state institutions and such, they always felt rushed and that they had to, fill in certain boxes as such. And so this was an attempt on my part to bring empathy into my approach in this project. Another thing, just coming back to this idea of tracing and evidence, is that the mothers always carry these files with them that include these documents, such as this little chit, almost like a receipt provided by the Human Rights Commission of Sri Lanka, which has its own problems as well. And these, again, become part of their archive, become part of the evidence to state that, yes, this person existed, yes, this person is missing. And again, here, the blackout comes in as well in order to anonymize these individuals. And one of the academics or scholars whose work inspired my approach is that of the late Malati Dialves, where in her 2009 piece, Disappearance and Displacement, she speaks about the issue of disappearance among the Sinhalese community, because there were Sinhalese dissidents as well, right? The Sinhalese Marxists who led insurrections in 71 and 87 to 89, many of whom were killed, and many also tortured and disappeared. And she asks the question, could the uncertainty and anxiety, often even a glimmer of hope that is produced by disappearance and its concomitant evocation of the temporariness of loss and revocability of absence, structure the re-inhabiting of worlds differently? Does it keep the spirit of resistance alive with the very non-presence of bodies, providing an impetus for protests and rebellion? She asks, how do such tracings unfold? Does tracing absent presence in the life of objects, albeit abject objects, provide a more meaningful framework for that re-inhabiting and a space for a politics? So in this essay, she's kind of talking about the ways in which, the clothing that they hold on to, the objects that belong to these disappeared persons, how those become simultaneously a presence, but also an absence of presence and a presence of absence. So what I decided to do was take Kumanan's photography of these continuous protests and literally trace them, right? And trace just the outline of the body that's holding on to this photograph, and trace just the outline of that photograph onto a tracing paper that's kind of transparent, so that when you hold it, the flesh that you see is bringing color into it. And again, it represents that absence of presence and the presence of absence. Among the other gestures that I found very powerful employed in these protests is that when the mothers decide to draw from their Tamil heritage. So here we see the Tea Chatti, which is a ritual coming from Hindu practice, which is again a fascinating way in which there is a poetics that comes into play into the act of protest in itself. So once the Office of Missing Persons came into effect, they started issuing certificates of absence, which came along with compensation for the mothers. And I'll go into this further in my lecture performance at Shpilat, but I wanted here to show what this kind of certificate looks like and what does it actually mean for the state to acknowledge absence in this sense, right? Here, another evocative image that shows these gestures at play. So in 2010, the then President Gotabaya Rajapaksa, who was ousted following the protest movement, Go Home Gota from last year. In 2010, he said, "I can't bring back the dead." And he changed the narrative to say that those we believe to be missing actually died during the conflict. And at this point, he instructed the Office of Missing Persons to give out certificates of death. So what does that mean then when the state is altering this narrative and then bringing in this certification of death? It's this rather sort of insidious process that is happening over a large spread of time that's escaping culpability. And that's why it's important in the present context to look at how the current president is trying to implement the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And we know from the past that these commissions have had many failings and that in their intent itself, there is a major lacking. And Alan Keenan recently has written that what Sri Lanka needs is truth. And absent to the changes of that would be needed for the concerns of those affected, it's important for the Human Rights Council of the UN and the international community to continue to keep up pressure on the Sri Lankan state, because it is quite adept at evading any kind of meaningful accountability and truth and closure for those who have suffered. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shimad. Yeah, it's as you've shown in the very last news, it's very current, it's this week, it's from yesterday, right, the news. So it shows how this civil war, starting officially from the 80s, but tracing back all the way to at least from this 1956, this colonial intervention of separating the ethnic groups by language policies, which I think we also see in many other parts of the world by colonial powers. And when we were talking about this, I also, in the preparation, that's how we come up with the title Tracing Fugitive Memories, because the act of tracing, I think all artists in their own way trying to trace something and then hoping to capture something that was in now the dominant narrative that we're missing or being neglected a lot of times deliberately. And I also, the way you show how, in a way, this institutional acknowledgement is wanting to settle something, but actually also silence many things. how you mentioned this empathy as a way to fight this institutional intervention was, I think, exactly. Sanka's going to tell us about your work. You show the many other very complicated sentiments or emotions that would affect individuals and identity that is not within this institutional frame of discussion when it comes to memories and the legacies of all these atrocities before. So I'd like to ask you to start. Thank you.
Thank you, Betty, and thank you, Imad. So wonderfully, you have set the context for this discussion, and also what was poignant was that you brought our attention into things that are absent. I think it's a Japanese saying which says, like, it's easy to notice things that are there. How do you notice things that are not there? So, it was, thank you for that. My work is a theater production. It's a collaborative theater project. The title for the Munich premiere is My Name is Tamil, 3 Lives. And it's a collaborative theater project with 3 individuals. One is myself, one is a theater person from Jaffna, and one is a theater maker and architect from, well, the from question is difficult because she was born in Delhi, brought up in Chennai, then in Bangalore, and then she moved to Zambia and Papua New Guinea before she went to her studies in the States, and now she is married and settled in Nepal. So it's this collaborative project between three of us, one from Nepal, me from South here in Kerala, and then Nicholas from Jaffna. And we also have a very important collaborator in this project. It's a playwright from Malaysia, Leopoldine. And so this is our kind of collaborative team. This project somehow, the initial seeds for this project began some time back in 2011 when I was doing an artist in residence program in Switzerland. And Switzerland is very cold, and I was there during the first 2 months, the January and February. And literally I was an artist in residence in a small apartment in Zurich. And to my relief, I had a radio. So I started tuning it. And you get to hear all sorts of sounds and languages when you tune a radio. And by chance, I picked up a broadcast in Tamil. And so then I started listening to it. And it was called Pulihalin Kural, the voice of tigers. It was basically the LTTE's radio. It was 2011. In 2009, the war was over, but they could still do the broadcast in Switzerland because Switzerland being this neutral country, it allowed the broadcast of this radio. And so for the whole good 2 months of January and February, I was listening to this broadcast. And the main content of the broadcast, they had songs, a lot of propaganda songs, then speeches, and then long lists of names of people who had died in the war and of people who had disappeared. Now, their name and age, and very long lists, and that was the main content. And until that time, I had known that there was this ethnic conflict and war going on. But the news that I got from the Indian side was very filtered. So I didn't know actually how violent the civil war had been. And from this, listening to this radio, I could kind of see things from the other side. And the level of violence was just really shocking for me. And it's also like, it was so shocking that it was happening very close to me. Like if I draw a straight line from my home to Jaffna, it will be just kilometers, maybe 500 kilometers max. So, in such proximity, when such horrible violence is going on, and when you are oblivious to it, there is a strange sense of unsettlement that I felt. And also my experience with Sri Lanka, a real experience, was during my studies in Singapore, when I used to take the Sri Lankan Airlines to travel. So because it was cheap, it was affordable for me, and also because they had this really incredible tourism promotion program, where you could give your passport, surrender the passport in Colombo, and then they will allow you to take you to a resort, nice sea-facing resort in the outskirts of Colombo, and you could stay there for 2 days or so. So each time when I went to Singapore and came back for nearly 6 times, I did this. I was staying there in this nice sea-facing resorts, and this was during the years 2004 and 2006. So to also know that such level of violence was going on in the northern parts of the country, while I am visiting as a tourist and sitting in sea-facing resorts, it was really unsettling. So and then I started doing some research on this, and stumbled upon this historical moment of the burning of the Jaffna Library in 1981. Now, this is this stayed with me. This research, where I reached, because it's I think for anybody it's a tragedy, a burning of a library, and this kind of, and also a Tamil library is a bit. A bit more close to me, because my mother tongue is Tamil, though I don't read and write Tamil. We live in Kerala. If you go back to the map which Imad showed, Kerala is on the top right, yeah, and Sri Lanka is on the top left of the peninsula. So I lived in Kerala, and the language spoken there is Malayalam. So, but in our family, we always spoke Tamil. And as a child, I remember my father listening to Radio Ceylon. It was the Sri Lankan Broadcasting Corporation, but we called it Radio Ceylon, and it had broadcasts that we could hear. And my father used to listen to this. And also, in my, as a child, in my memory, I never had the image that Sri Lanka was a foreign country, because of the stories of Ramayana, which my parents and grandparents used to tell me, and also from the folk tales like Silappadigaram, which kind of connects the two lands. So as a child, I had this, I never had this image of Sri Lanka being a foreign country. So then much later in 1991, with the assassination of Rajiv Gandhi, another very historically important event in this time period and related to this geography. That was when really my family sort of made a very strong disconnection with the Sri Lankan, and the Indian and the Tamil idea became dissolved. So these were the starting points for me for this project, and I had to have work with these 2 collaborators, because one, Nicholas from Jaffna, had a really first-hand experience of this brutal civil war. So it was very important to kind of connect these histories, like personal histories, to find other perspective. And it was also then important for us to have somebody who is really from the outside, like my collaborator Kavita, who in a way she is far removed, but also in many ways deeply connected with this land and memory. And she visited Jaffna in 2002 during the brief ceasefire, and she recollects her memories, her what she saw in Jaffna, and this is the textual content. And with working with my playwright, we have this real memories, first-hand accounts and memories, and with the intervention of a playwright, we have been able to sort of fictionalize, again, use more of this freedom to tell what we want to tell in a theater piece. So the history becomes a source, memories become a source material, but it is curated and constructed as a creative, collaborative art project, which then allows us to talk about things that are difficult to talk, I suppose. So to come back to your question of what strategies, do you use to approach memories? I think to the cortex, which Imad was talking about, the same, to find the once removed fiction allows us to kind of connect and relate, and to also find distance to talk about things that are difficult to talk, and also things that are important to talk today. As theater makers, we always ask this question to ourselves, what kind of stories, what stories needs to be told today? And this is what we have about, to look at this region, this particular region of South Asia, and to also find collaborations and narratives that can be built across geopolitical boundaries. In this particular case, a cultural context of Tamilness brings us together, but also it's very clear as we started working for us that we really are three different people, three different Tamil experience. It's very three different Tamil experiences. So you can't also bring it and put it under, you can't stereotype it. So this is, I'm rehearsing on this play. We have developing the text, and the next we go into rehearsal. So it's all a bit vague and unclear for now. But when we have a premiere, I hope we'll be able to express what we want to say through this piece. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sanka, and especially that you said you had the first premiere of this piece in Basel, our co-production partner, but now will be a completely different play, because I suppose with all these months in between that you have a different distance that you can think about the presentations, and so we and I mean, if you happen to think about something in terms of that you would like to share, we can come back later. But I also understand from both of you that we shouldn't say everything out now, so we can see it in the theaters and in the rooms together. And I find it especially interesting that the reason why we put the two artists together today is not only because the obvious connection of the theme, but it's also, I feel their work both in different ways shows how boundaries of ethnicities and language was all the time not the same, not equivalent to the national borders, let alone region borders. Like what Sanka just said, if you look at ethnicity from a cultural point of view, it's the idea of Tamil is very, very complicated, and everybody have their own situatedness, but there's something connecting them. And in Imad's case, we see how language is used to divide people and within a country, a nation, but then there are so many different sides. And as I know that Imad actually in the work would go more into the complexity of the different victims in a way that was not only the politically correct, that kind of victim that that fits our imagination of a simple, this side is perpetrator, that side's victim story. So I was wondering, for example, my first question is probably, Imad, just now you mentioned about this empathetic listening, something that you use to counter this institutional, I would say, the second violence toward the victim. What would you say that you observed in this process? So some quality that you learned during this process concerning how we look at these atrocities and what this might mean for individuals or societies. Yeah.
Yeah. So something that I observed in my conversations is that I think when we study conflict and when we are reading about it, we tend to gravitate towards this idea of authentic sources, right? In the case of Sri Lanka, there's very recently a documentary came out through Channel 4, and at the end of the war as well, there was Channel 4's Killing Fields. And I remember as a journalist at that point, attending a discussion where it was these Sinhalese Buddhists who were trying to debunk the Western conspiracy of Channel 4 Killing Fields, right? Where they were looking at the footage that they were showing of the atrocities of the Sri Lankan state towards Tamil militants, and very clumsily trying to claim that, oh, look at the angle this rifle is at. It couldn't have possibly shot this person and such. And there are these ways in which these things are challenged. And there is a predominant sort of feeling that a lot of Sinhalese Buddhists have, that there's a Western conspiracy that's trying to disrupt this country, you know? And so we tend to give more precedence to certain channels or media as opposed to others. You know, there's a difference, for example, between how the Sinhalese media and the Tamil media represent what happens on a day-to-day basis. There are certain erasures and silences and voices that come through. And I think something that I learned, so I studied journalism in Chennai at ACJ, and something that I learned there from Nityanand Jayaraman was that the expert is not the one in the think tank, in academia, the journalist who has made a life out of covering a particular thing. The expert is the person on the ground. The expert is the person who is dealing with this in a day-to-day, everyday sense, in which it's like, there is no escape from it. It is very much the struggle that you live every day. And so when it came to listening to the mothers of the disappeared talk about this issue, I soon learned that there was so much complexity to the way in which they were navigating, right? The way in which they had to speak and report to commissions, to reporters, to academics. They were very aware of how there are very different interests at play. They were able to talk about things that I've never seen in a journalistic report, that I've never seen in a documentary, that I've never seen in any kind of academic text, you know? And it's very easy to kind of dismiss this as, oh, what do they know? Like, how could they possibly grasp the complexity of local politics and geopolitics? But they do. And there was so much information they gave me that is so highly sensitive that it was very much a decision on my part as to how to talk about this without, you know, creating a rupture that I myself would not be able to navigate. So I think for me, it was important to listen and to acknowledge that these are the people who have the highest stake in terms of knowing the facts and knowing how to navigate this this phenomena that is their life, you know. And I think, yeah, that's one observation I would like to make. And it's difficult also, right? If you were to, for example, my book starts with an acknowledgement that says, this work would not have been possible without the guidance, assistance, and encouragement of persons I shall not name, as the current political climate has made it a risk to use. And it includes the interviews with families of the disappeared, where I do not name them. It includes an interview with a Catholic priest who works with them, who I do not name, as well as a political analyst and journalist who's lived in Japan his whole life, who I do not name. So it's simultaneously this thing of giving precedence to what they are reporting, but at the same time, protecting their identities as well, because the more they are spotlighted, the more the state can crack down. And this is a highly militarized, singular Buddhist colonizer state perpetuating genocidal tactics, right? So it's a very tricky terrain to navigate in that sense, I would say.
Yeah, that's I have to always think about when we were brainstorming about the title. This fugitive, really, both in the sense of it's fleeting, it's difficult to capture, but also you always have to flee, flee from this institutional gaze or surveillance and the law, basically. It's not considered legitimate and so on. And Tra, are you back with us audioly? Hopefully.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oof.
Not so loud, but yeah.
Yeah. Sorry.
We hear you. Yeah.
Before, I don't know what happened.
Yeah.
Actually, I really appreciate hearing you talk about your work, and I have the privilege to see a video of your work before. And also from today, from hearing you share about the process, I can't help but as a theater maker, I'm basically interested in how the work is formed, and I can't help but noticing that there's a parallel between the way that you conceptualize the two works, but then I would think that by still tracing the memory, I feel like for Imad, it means a lot like tracing the emotions of the people involved. And while for Sankar, I feel like the tracing goes with the facts of the people, the experience of the people who worked with you and who co-created this work with you. And then you both mentioned an aspect of fictionalizing or engaging fiction as a way to create the work. And I feel like for Sankar's work, it has a lot to do with the body, how the body actually transfer these lines into something that the audience would see coherently as a work. And for Imad's work, I feel like it does come back to the objects that you start with, and also you produce a book, and also in your lecture performance, I do see that you still use photographs, you use actual textual material. So from that appreciation of your work, I would like to ask you, as a maker, what do you feel like the work retain? What do you feel like your work retain and offer? As a creator of the work.
Yeah, it's it's interesting, this dichotomy of fiction and non-fiction, right? Like, I'm primarily a poet. So I consider this book as a work of documentary poetics, inspired by Muriel Rukeyser's Book of the Dead, for example, where you're using fact, you're using a lot of very rigorous things, but you're also employing poetics in how you approach that. So I'll just read a small section from my book. So when it came to tackling the Paranagama Commission, it had issues of translation, of how translators were involved in this, because these are Tamil people speaking to a Sinhalese state, right? So you need translators. And there was a criticism of mistranslation, gross mistranslations, in terms of the transference of this evidence going to the state, right? And that is, again, a tactic of the state in operating in a almost like fictionalizing of the thing. So what I did is, when I took that corpus, the text from the report that pertains to the representations made, I fed it into what's called a Markov chain algorithm. It's in your phones in the predictive text that you use. It basically, there was a Russian statistician, Markov, who was so taken up by Pushkin's poetry that he studied it mathematically. What is the probability of one word being preceded or followed by another? And so he created this algorithm called the Markov chain, where you can feed in a bulk of text and then generate new text. And this new text is sort of like a speculative text, but it's predetermined. It's very much the past determines the future. And I think in a poetic sense, that applies to Sri Lanka as well. There are so many points of no return where we are continuously bound. So when I fed the representations made to the Panogama Commission, one of the phrases that the algorithm produced was, "her evidence aged." And that to me was a striking sort of poetic of how even these mothers who are the evidence, who are the witnesses of this, are aging, are dying out as well. And it's part of the state's strategy to let this issue continue so that they do pass away and sort of rely on it to disappear. In terms of a fictionalizing that I employ, at one point, there is a part in the report where the state starts to develop a conspiracy that no, people were not actually disappeared, that they got asylum overseas, and they themselves are not reporting back to their families. And so their families are put in this state where they're constantly in this unresolved mourning, right? And I got so, it hurt me so much to read that and to think about how the state was employing this tactic. And so there's a passage in which the report says that the disappeared went underground, right? Or changed their identities. And I decided to flip this. And I wrote, the commission went underground or changed their identities, or alternatively went abroad without the knowledge of those disappeared persons. The commission feels this is a vital contribution to reconciliation. The majority of those disappeared persons who had been in custody went underground. This truth must be ascertained. Without the truth, the fate of the families, their release. The disappeared have requested information on the names of commissioners who may have sought refuge in foreign countries. Such information has been denied by foreign governments, citing their privacy laws as an obstacle. So here is a moment where I'm using this kind of fiction to turn that around and to use the state's own strategies of erasure, denial, and amnesia towards its own corpus and towards the archive of the state itself. And I think, I think as a poet, I believe that all poetry is nonfiction. I don't know if that category and that dichotomy works really, because I believe that like we use fiction to tell the truth, really, right? In
Capture
ways that
different kind of reality. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I actually originally want to go back to Sankar, but then I want to follow up a question on Imaro, in case Sankar have something to comment on. Is because I feel exactly what we're dealing with is complexity of memories, be it the way it's remembered, its comprehensiveness, its complexity, or be it because it's from different situatedness, different perspective. But the institutional framework, for example, the symbolized gestures very often simplify it and mostly make it fixed, and it cannot be changed anymore. So it become a one interpretation for all, and that's it. And in very different contexts, during our curatorial discussion, we also talk about that's, for example, what is very much being criticized in Germany. This everybody now very well known how the Holocaust memory is being discussed in Germany. People think this is something, at least people really worked on it for decades. And so, but then it also suffered from this problem of once it becomes a symbolistic gesture, and then it becomes simplified. And as if we know it already, case closed. And if you have any other memories, then you're somehow, you are the single case, you're a bit strange, or you're the minority. Here we again have the majority-minority problem again. So I wonder, what do you think as an artist or as a member of your societies in general about these symbolistic gestures? Or I was actually a bit thinking about what Iman showed us earlier about this question of maybe Sri Lanka doesn't need a Truth and Reconciliation Committee.
Sankar, shall I take this? Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting to think about narratives, memorialization, and monuments, right? I come from the Muslim community, and the Muslim community from the Eastern Province, who have this kind of approach to reality where you see this world as dunya, in a sense, a kind of illusory world. And therefore, if you look at the nature of our community, we did not document our histories. We do not have a Mahavamsa. We do not have the kind of, we don't have an equivalent to the Jaffna Library in a sense, right? So I've often looked upon the way that the Tamil community memorializes, whether you're looking at this continuous protest or you're looking at Mullaikaikal, Genocide Remembrance Day and such, it is, and even the Black July memorialization, it is this constant ritual that the community is a part of, not just within the country under so much surveillance, but also in its diasporas. And I'm greatly inspired by the resilience of the Tamil people. And I think it's something that the Muslim community can also learn from. And I think there is always that danger of the simplification of things, that once your kind of community becomes a monolith in a sense. And I think in other parts of my work, I attempt to disrupt this notion of a singular identity for Muslims of Sri Lanka, which is something that the state and colonizers have kind of imposed upon us. A lot of us came from India. We were Mapilas or Marakkars who came from the Coromandel or Malabar coast. We married into Tamil, Mukkuvar caste families. We speak Tamil in the East, right? And so there is a Tamilness within us as well. And as a community, there is a gross oversimplification of what it meant. For example, I mentioned in 1990, October, Muslims in Jaffna were expelled by the LTTE. And this is due to the shifting trajectory of Muslim politics, or the emergence of Muslim politics, and a perceived lack of solidarity with the Tamil separatist cause, right? And you see the effect of that on the electoral map, where this area of Puttalam, where the Muslim IDPs kind of vote for Mahinda Rajapaksa in a sense. So I think in terms of thinking about like simplicity, I think that's something that I feel that the Tamil community has been able to resist, but is always kind of trapped by, in terms of how the media and others talk about it, and especially how state media and such talk about it. But I feel that among my generation and the younger generation, I think people are starting to get into the nuances and kind of resist this as well. And of course, there's a history of doing that also. But yes, it is very important to kind of reject that simplistic approach, especially when you're talking about rather diverse communities.
Sanka, do you have anything to feed into concerning this resistance of Tamil people, or anything Ima just now addressed? My link was only this. I thought your project, in a way, really not all three of you, apart from being very differently situated, but you were not the immediate. You are not the immediate. How do you say? People who are on site, but then it shows how it's still the impact of history spreads on different generations and people living in different parts of the world. So I wonder whether you have any discoveries that you would like to share with us concerning that. Oops.
We showed the piece in Basel. It was called My Name is Tamil. It did not have this.
Oops. Today is not our lucky day, but I'm sure Sanka will come back. We had a flawless technical check, and then
maybe it's the timing, like, you know, at 2 o'clock it works. It always works.
but I mean, I think Sanka will come back very soon. Yeah.
Yay, Sanka.
The fact that we're really sitting in different 3 time zones who can connect is already great. Hi, you're back.
Can you hear me?
Yes, but we don't see you yet.
Not seeing you yet.
Or do you think, yeah?
Yeah, my video is active on my window, but I don't know.
Okay, it probably needs some time to process.
I can't see.
Oh, we hear you. Yeah, maybe you want to continue.
Okay.
It's fine.
Yeah, and this when we did it in Basel, we've some of the reviews that we got and from the feedbacks, like we felt that people see this project more like a documentary piece, because we are really talking from a place of lived experience and real memories. There is nothing fabricated in our text. Everything that we talk, that we share in the piece is experience, lived experience. And then as a result, like we felt like we are not like we are being seen. The piece is lens, and which probably, like, you know, we felt like it is stopping us from really bringing the piece to its fullness. So that's why now we have, like, you know, really gone into a more fictional plane. There is a protagonist in the piece, and there are and a woman. And again, in the piece, the conflict that is there is like this lack of listening. Again, what Imad was, you know, we don't listen, and when we don't listen, like, you know, we can't build anything together. We can't do anything together. It's like the Tower of Babel, and you know, this is like, how do we resolve?
Wait a sec.
Do we?
Yeah, Sanka, now we see you, but then
the empathetic listening.
Can you start with how do we? At least that's what I heard last. Yeah, how do we?
Like, how do we like develop an ear to empathetically listen? Like in Imad's project, like, you know, when we don't listen, we don't see each other, we don't hear each other, and there is nothing that we can share with each other. And this is a point where we cease to function in a sense of together. And again, like, you know, I may be putting things in a very simplistic ways, but like, you know, this, like, probably this conflict, this ethnic conflict, not just in Sri Lanka, anywhere else, and you know, it is this like inability to listen another language, another voice, like you know, and language for me plays a very central role in this. In this region where I live, there are communities who don't have a written script. So in Attapadi, so they rely, like, they don't have a culture of writing, and as a result, what happens is people from outside come and write their histories, in a language which they cannot ever access or read. And you know, when you have circumstances like that, like, it is really, for communities, it becomes impossible to make their interests count in the larger kind of society. And you know, it is becomes a fertile ground for conflict. So it starts with this listening, like how, like, even in my piece, like, it's like the two characters, they don't listen to each other, but then when they start to listen to each other, they are able to tell stories together.
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, I guess what I asked earlier about all these simplification, or this unwilling to accept that stories goes on. It doesn't just once somebody writes a conclusion and that's it. Also come from that. And Tra, do you still have some questions there, or from the audience, or?
I don't see any.
I think no. Yeah, but yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I have to say it is a bit hard to listen to all of us on the internet. But I mean, I just really appreciate this opportunity that you know, you actually actively sit and listen. That I'm repeating what you just said for the past half an hour, but like I feel like I totally agree with the need to create a space to receive and not to impose things. And I can't help but reading a few action in this sense. For example, in Imad's work, it was a bit of an awe for me that the authority issue a certificate of absence. It's like authenticify, making an absence official. It's just a shocking action. And I used to think that to exert power, you actually go ahead and positively impose a force on something. That's power. But now I feel like the kind of power that really speaks for itself, and what we need is really this space of receiving and of acknowledging, for example, the memories, the voices that we can't hear, on the very lousy mainstream sort of writing of history. I'm speaking of these things coming from a country that we have
Vietnam, that is, because I just now realized we didn't introduce you because of technical difficulties. Yeah.
Yeah, you didn't hear me from the beginning. I'm from Vietnam, and we have a single party government. So the modern history of Vietnam is written by this government, basically, and it is very singular. It has no space for different voices, for the story of different minorities in the nation. Yeah, and I just really appreciate how initiatives like like you just share with us, engage a different kind of thinking, a different kind of attitude towards this absence of different lines of history in you know.
And I was just wondering, as we talk about language several times, Sangha, does language play a huge role this time in your reiteration at Spiat? Because
yeah, well, like, not like, I had, like, used language or looked at language in my earlier production, not to that level. But here, still, again, there are these dangerous liaisons of language, power, and terror that are mapped in the piece in many ways. Like, it's the subtext is about, like, every time a language is mentioned or spoken, it is a political. It has a political underline to it. Yeah, and just to, like, I think I didn't finish my thought earlier. Like, when I'm sure Imad knows, like, when I talk to my friends or collaborators, even some memories are censored. Like, you can't write your history. Like, there are, like, a huge amount of censorship, like, still in place, so that, like, it's impossible to even recollect recent memories, like, in terms of writing. So when like, there is this forceful suppression of history, is it, like, it really needs to be questioned, I feel.
Yeah. Like, you can't, for example, in your piece, this now you don't know your family history because you were not supposed to talk about it, and how do you pass it on? Yeah. And how about this? Because of that, I want to ask, for the mothers of the disappeared, now they're also aging, and do their family continue on, like, because they would have been so brave and go out, and at least that their part of the story is known, at least. So through their risky behavior, so their action, so to say. How is this in general still talked about in contemporary Sri Lanka, or understood?
Yeah, it remains to be seen who will take on the protest movement when it comes to the families of the disappeared. I think it is a rather state-serving narrative to kind of buy into this idea that it will extinguish when their lives extinguish, in a sense. I would like to believe that it will be taken up by the surviving members of the family. So we don't just use the term mothers of the disappeared, we also include the term families of the disappeared, right? So there are sisters, brothers, husbands, fathers who are also involved in this. But in terms of thinking about generations, there is, I think, a lot of differences in terms of approaches among the Tamil community, in terms of whether or not they feel like continuing this struggle. You have people who are buying into this idea of an inclusive nationalism, for example, that you have people who have let go of the separatist ideals, and who even when you look at the various organizations of families of the disappeared, one of the things that came up in my interviews is that they have different approaches. Some of them do work with local politicians and accept the compensation, right? In effect, kind of silencing their struggle. And then you have others who refuse to accept certificate of absence or certificate of death. There are some who accept the certificate of absence, but not death. So there is a great deal of complexity in terms of how they approach continuing the struggle. And I think it remains to be seen how the younger generation will choose to navigate this terrain.
Mm. And how it's then, I'm happy to see that this diverse interpretation into, there seem to be what the younger generation can contribute to see more sides of the stories, to see how instead of, so it's not so much about insisting on one thing, is to show how many different stories there actually are. And yeah, and I'm saying that, not, of course, not only thinking about the conflict in Sri Lanka, but in many, many other places, and how all this violence is being again in different forms imposed in terms of instrumentalizing what Iman earlier said, other people's lives, basically, to fit their narratives, maybe sometimes even unconsciously. Was this, because I remember Ima talked about how careful you had to be in the beginning of your project, that you, who you are and who are you to tell the story. And I wonder, how about Sanka, when you approach your collaborators about this, did they have some doubts about, because who can tell what is, of course, a very political issue, but because what I find interesting is really shows the complexity, but also not this oversimplified universal or weird or Tamils, as we see it very clearly, very, very different experiences. So whether you can share something there.
Yeah, see, we are very clearly telling things that are from our lives. Like, so, like it's personal histories that we're talking about, but in a backdrop of the political history. So in that sense, like, you know, we are very clear about who we are. Like, I am an Indian. Like, you know, I like, you know, it's very clear. Nicholas is from Jaffna. And we are also aware of the underlying political currents between these two countries, and what, how India has for its own political interests meddle with this civil war in Sri Lanka and try to make the most of the situation. So, you know, we are aware of, in the play, we talk about the role of the peacekeeping force, and it's from a real memory of a peacekeeping force going into Nicholas's house and really ransacking everything, pulling people out, even like torturing them with chains and metal. So, there are these are like, you know, we tell our own stories. So in that sense, the question of authenticity, authorship, you know, it's it doesn't sort of like, we think we are telling our stories. So through that, of course, like, you know, you like, you know, I strongly like also see the point of like, it will be very superficial and almost impossible for me to tell about Jaffna or Sri Lanka. Like, you know, I'm able to tell it through Nicholas. And Nicholas was born in 1984. So he doesn't tell, he talks about the burning of the library as which happened before he was born. And he collects an eyewitness account from a Catholic priest. So the text that we speak about it is quoted from the Catholics priest. So in that sense, like the text is very carefully generated and curated, so that, you know, we don't go into this trap of questions of representation, which can be dead end.
I would like to follow up on what Sankar is saying. So recently I was introduced to the work of Sylvia Wynter and this concept of auto-narration, autopoiesis, which is in essence is this idea that the stories we tell, our own stories, right, in all their complexities, that is what has the power to disrupt the structural violence, the state, for example, right? Because it's very easy to flatten things, to simplify things, to, fall into, as Sankar just said, traps of representations. But I think, it's really important to also recognize that there is an always already, like in the case of Nicholas, right? Being born at a point at which so many events have happened, you're born into a context, and then the story of how you navigate that is just as important as an overarching meta-narrative of a community as such, right? How individuals navigate these things. And so in telling our stories and the ways that we have grappled with these, like even the question of who am I to tell this story is kind of the turn in my lecture performance as well, because it's a very direct critique that someone can make towards a journalist or towards an artist like myself. But my position is that I am interested in expanding this idea of Tamilness to also include Tamil Muslim experiences, which themselves have been steered and kind of formalized in certain ways by colonialism and ethnic and language politics in Sri Lanka. So I think it is extremely important for us to hear the stories of individuals and understand that in that context. Yeah.
And I also think when I was watching both of your works, not the finished product, is work in progress in a way. What fascinated me so much and what gave me access was really this act of tracing, that you are not always immediately the witness that was telling something you have seen yourself. There was a lot of speculation, but speculation in terms of, because this concerns you also, although you were not directly there, but it changed the world you were in, changed your family life, changed the stories the tradition you have. And so I that was something I can completely relate to, and can relate to this wish to somehow trace back something, because an uncertainty or a loss is shown there, and there was much more coming out from this discovery. And we are almost time up. But in case if there's any last remarks from any of you, if not, please.
I'd just like to say that I just want to acknowledge the support extended to me in doing this work, initially by Colombo Scope in commissioning Testimony of the Disappeared to Pro Helvetia, Swiss Arts Council, New Delhi, for taking me to Basel, introducing me to Kasana, who hosted the first iteration, and of course to Spielart and its collaborators in inviting me to further explore this. And I'm greatly looking forward to being in Munich and to be in conversation with the other artists.
Definitely. That moment gave me a moment to think. What I wanted to say was basically gave me access to history, I felt, because the history is such a big thing, but you feel, actually it's a very intuitive thing, you feel you're connected, but then you don't know how exactly. And I think each of your work in very specific ways show a kind of possibility. And we all look very much forward to seeing it at Spielart. And at the very end, I want to thank all of you for being here. And also, Mario, I think we have a little few information to share with the audience, like concerning the upcoming talks, or, I mean, I can also say verbally, I just saw visually it's clearer. Yes, please. Say verbally. Okay. Yeah, we have another two, as I said in the beginning. So the second one would, as it would take place live in Saigon, that's our experiment to connect a different audience, because we think all these kind of talk really needs a different audience. Coming from my background, had been brought up and live in Taipei, Taiwan, and now live in Munich, in Germany. I see how a lot of this conversation very often doesn't break the regional barriers or the cultural barriers or language barriers. So we want to do that, but don't worry, we still get to see the recording of the conversation with Hans Werner Krösinger and Regina Dura and Dinh Cu Le, the Vietnamese visual artist. We will see online in Spia Festival website from 22nd of September on. And then the last one is on the 29th of September, where we will talk to Hong Kongese artist Vi Leon, whose work is also invited to Spia Art, who killed the elephant, and then a Taiwanese visual artist, An Qi Ling. Her work is not in this edition, but the artist practice have quite something in common that we like to talk about. And then also today is 8th of September, and our pre-selling will start 13th of September, and we're finally in this moment after this more than a year of preparation that we are going to meet you. And we do have social media channels to reach us, the Facebook, Instagram, as you know, and actually the most efficient thing is to book our newsletter. Then you always get informed. Yeah, thank you very much again, and we hope you have a nice afternoon, evening. Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Betty.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tra. Thank you, Spia Art.
Thank you.